Welcome to the last episode, spin-off series on English wine on the Looking Into Wine podcast. Over the last 4 episodes, we have covered the history and the evolution of English wine, talked to producers from the key wine regions, Cornwall, Hampshire, Sussex, and now we visit Kent. Kent is situated in the southeastern corner of England. This part of the country has seen a large number of investment in new vineyards and wineries, as well as the growth of established wineries. We talked to Ruth Simpson of Simpson Vineyard on why her and her husband decided to start a winery in Kent, and their latest addition to the portfolio, the Q-Class Chardonnay and Pinot Noir, a still wine from the region. Then the conversation moves to Harry Rymill, the marketing manager of the estate. With him, we discussed why those investments are happening in Kent, is the microclimate of the region, and the style of wine produced at Simpson's winery. If you haven't done it already, remember to follow the podcast to know when the next episodes are going to be released. Now, on with the show. Hi, I'm Mattias Carpazza, and this is the Looking Into Wine podcast. Wine and winemaking can be complex, but this podcast has a simple mission. We want to give you the skills and tools to harness your passion about wine. Through this series, we will shine a spotlight on some of the different regions, process, and concepts that shape the fascinating world of wine. I hope you enjoy the show and your own journey looking into wine. Welcome to the Looking Into Wine podcast. I'm your host, Mattias Carpazza, and today with me, I have Ruth Simpson of Simpson Wineries, and welcome to the show, Ruth.
Thank you very much for having me.
You're welcome. So, Ruth, you come from a long history of winemaking in southern France, but you then decided a few years ago to do an experiment in the south of England. What was the decision? Why can't tell me a bit more about that?
So my husband Charles and I have been growing grapes and making wine in the sunny south of France for the past 20 years. We've just completed our 20th harvest at Domaine Sainte-Rose, which is in the Languedoc region. And when we first started out at Sainte-Rose, we were keen wine consumers, had no background in wine at all. So we learned by doing literally everything down at Sainte-Rose first time round. And 10 years after establishing that business and successfully selling all our wine in bottles, all for export, nothing stays in France, we started reading more about what was going on in England, tasting some extraordinary sparkling wines, specifically sparklings, from the real groundbreakers like Nightimber and Ridgeview, people who, if we think we're on the cutting edge, they very much were on the bleeding edge. And we've got a lot to thank them for as far as blazing the trail. But we definitely saw that there was an opportunity, not only because of the terroir and because England was such a dynamic area where the industry was very young. You could be part of really shaping really what is a very exciting future. So we saw 2 blocks of land. They were just grade 3 arable farmland at that stage, advertised on Decanter Online, of all places. And we came to visit them. Stephen Skelton had already taken soil samples from those particular blocks, and Stratton Parker, who were being very clever land agents and hoping that would make it provide an uplift on the price of what was essentially grade 3 arable land. But when we came to visit, we realized that the vineyard sites were extraordinary, really perfect sites, if such a thing can exist. We're on pure chalk soils, so dig down about 25 centimeters, you're onto solid chalk. We're only 8 miles from or maybe 5 miles from the White Cliffs of Dover, so it's iconic soils. The sites themselves were lined with ancient old lime trees, south facing. And we just felt that the opportunity was too good to miss. So we bought 30 hectares or 90 acres of land, and over the past 9 years now, I suppose, have grown the business to the extent that you see it here today, with the winery. We're currently in the middle of our sixth harvest, and we're going from strength to strength.
Yeah, I mean, it started in 2014, really, the first planting, and the first wines in 2016. I mean, later on in the episode, I'm going to talk to Harry Rymill about some of the nuance of the region and about the winery. But I wanted to ask you, when you arrived in Kent, you decided to do something about the promotion of the region, and you were one of the leading force to establish the Wine Garden of England. How that came about, and what was the idea behind it?
It was interesting. I think because we were relative newcomers, and being the new kids on the block, we could ask the silly questions. And it was actually when the Sussex PDO discussion first became public news. I think as a Kent producer, we very much thought, well, if Sussex proceeds down that line, is there going to be a movement to have an appellation for Kent and for Hampshire and all the other regions? Do we feel we need to then follow suit? And so that really instigated the discussion, but also just because we just felt that producers in Kent should be talking to one another, sharing best practice, and specifically on wine tourism, working together to really develop an area which is becoming very very important to the industry as a way of actually bringing visitors and educating the public about the quality and diversity of English wines. So very much it was about it was in the spirit of sharing best practice, and ultimately now the focus really is on wine tourism, and we are aspiring to create a wine trail that's as highly respected as somewhere like a Napa Valley. So we're setting the bar pretty high.
Absolutely, I mean, it sounds great. And before I let you go for the rest of your day, I wanted to ask about your latest wines, the Q-Class wine. Wow. Tell me all about it. What is it? Because it's very exciting.
Well, it is very exciting. We've literally just launched pre-orders and have had a huge amount of interest, which we're delighted about. But the 2020 harvest, although we got hit quite badly by frost here at Simpsons, the quality of the fruit was exceptional, especially for still wine production. And so we have had great success with our Roman Road Chardonnay and with our Rabbit Hole Pinot Noir. And we just thought the 2020 vintage was the year we could take it to another level. And we really used the best of the best fruit that we picked from 2020. We used the best barrels that money can buy for some of the juice to complete fermentation and also to age. And we've only bottled in Magnum format, and there are only 1,200 bottles of each of those wines. So very limited edition, but we're pitching it very high at £100 per Magnum bottle. But it's something very special. It will only be made in years that we can achieve that level of quality, and it will always be in very limited quantities. The story behind the name, the Q Class, is because the fruit came from our Railway Hill site, and the Railway Hill site is so called because the light railway that used to run from Canterbury to Folkestone used to run through that field along the Elan Valley, going between those two towns. And the rolling stock that was used in the sort of 1930s were the Q-class steam engines. So hence the name for this little exclusive mini range. Okay,
I mean, it's such an interesting story, and there's a still wine, which is very much what you're becoming famous for, or what is setting you apart from the rest of most of England. It's very interesting. I mean, Ruth, thank you for this 10 minutes together. I'm going to continue on talking to Harry about the nuance of the terroir and all the different areas that you have. Thank you for coming on. I know you have limited time, but thank you.
Brilliant. Lovely to talk to you.
And I welcome on the show Harry Rymill, the marketing manager of the estate. Welcome to the show, Harry.
Thank you. Thank you for coming down to Kent and coming to see us.
What drawn you to the Simpsons?
I'm originally from Adelaide in South Australia, and I've spent a fair bit of time working with similar-sized wine estates, family-owned wine estates in Australia, working in sales and marketing, but also in the cellars and the vineyards. And we just come from a 6-year drought in South Australia, so we're on underwater restrictions. So it was great to come back and see some green grass and feel some rain. So we moved back, and I decided to set up as an independent wine merchant in Whitstable on the north coast of Kent, selling a range of wines, which I really enjoyed for 9 years. And from day one, I sold Kentish wines. I wanted to sell local products. So we had a selection of Bittenden, Gusbourne, Chapeldown wines, Woodchurch as well. And the locals were very receptive to those. We talked about them. So that was great. Interestingly, I'd been watching what Charles and Ruth Simpson were doing with their planting of their vineyard in the press. And they looked like they were doing, taking things very seriously and putting a lot of thought into it. And I was, interested in the English wine industry. I think it was exciting times ahead. So I approached them and said, do you have any need for somebody like me? And luckily they said yes. They were looking to hold events and tours, and they needed to. So I agreed to, and having tasted the wines that they had, I thought it was the right choice. It was very exciting. The wines were really interesting and really approachable. So I've been here for about 2.5 years now.
Okay, wow. And so why did Ruth and Charles decided to move to England in the first place? Because they had a bit of long history in southern France. And interestingly, you were saying to me earlier when we have a conversation that when they found this site where the Simpsons are, it was one of the first sites to sell for wine production, wasn't that story?
Yes. Charles was telling me the other day that while they were looking for suitable sites in the East Kent, he came across an advertisement in Decanter Wine magazine for 2 parcels of land near the beautiful village of Barham, where we are, in the Kent Downs area of outstanding natural beauty. But both these parcels were being sold or marketed as being suitable for vineyards or viticulture. And he thinks that's one of the first times that the land has actually been advertised that way. Came with a report from Stephen Skelton, I believe, who's an expert on English vineyards and was involved early on in the setting up of Chapeldown. So they invited him to join them on site and discussed his report and looked at the site, and they agreed that it was looked suitable for planting vineyards. So they bought the 2 parcels of land, one 30 acres and the other one on the other side of the village of 60 acres, which have since become the smaller one, Roman Road Vineyard, and the other one, Railway Hill Vineyard.
Yeah, so both of the sites is where the name of your wine takes the names from the vineyards. And it's interesting to me to see that Kent is really becoming part of the big movement for English wine. There's a lot of interest here from not only obviously from the Simpsons, but also other winery, and especially around Canterbury, because Simpsons near Canterbury, and it seems to be the place where a lot of investment is happening.
Yes, it's really interesting. So Charles and Ruth made their decision back in 2011-12 and planted only the sparkling wine varieties, classic varieties. But since then, producers like Chapeldown have got 2 new vineyards, and one near Canterbury, one near Maidstone. Nye Timber, a very good English sparkling wine producer based in Sussex, but their 2 new vineyards are in near Canterbury and Maidstone. And the very exciting development where the family-owned champagne house, Tattinger, in a joint venture with their British importer, Hatch Mansfield, did a lot of research and soil testing, and they've planted 200 acres of vineyard near Canterbury, the area of Chilham. They've bought more land because to plant more vineyard, and they've got permission to build a winery and visitor centre. So it's a very exciting development for this part of Kent. And
why does Kent is attracting this many people? What is the?
Well, it's the climate, the sites, the aspects. So we've got plenty of choices of south-facing slopes, which is vital for angling the vines towards the sunshine. We have the North Downs, which is predominantly chalk, with lots of slopes, and that chalk seam is exactly the same seam as you find in Champagne and parts of Burgundy. And the climate now is very similar to what was the climate was like in Champagne 20 years ago and parts of Chablis. So the conditions are right, and particularly here in Kent. And I think people are seeing the results of the wines produced here and showing a great deal of interest.
I mean, we're today is in the middle end of October nearly, and I was surprised how nicely mild this area was. And I mean, it's very interesting compared to most of Europe, and this maritime climate really helps to have this prolonged ripening season, because we were walking in the vineyards, and the vines the grapes are still there, and you yet to harvest some of these grapes. And we were looking earlier at the vineyards, and I wanted to speak a bit about your sparkling wines, and what do you do, and what are your sparkling wines that you have at the moment, and what grape are you working with?
Yeah, so from day one, the project was predominantly about sparkling wine. Charles and Ruth wanted to produce sparkling wine. They'd had some experience, tasting still wines from England, and felt that from the evidence that was presented to them that it was a difficult thing to produce high quality still wine. So they thought, let's focus on sparkling wine. So that's why they only planted the 3 classic varieties, Chardonnay, Pinot Noir and Pinot Meunier. But having said that, they also set out to plant in their new vineyards not only the clones that have been developed for hundreds of years suitable for sparkling wine, they also planted Burgundy clones of each variety with a view of adding depth and complexity to their sparkling wines. Yeah. So there's a lot of thought went into it. And as a result of that, I think their aim was to produce very elegant, fine sparkling wines, but with a little bit more balance and generosity in them than had perhaps previously been produced in the UK. And that followed through eventually also into the still wines they started producing. At the moment,
I mean, the one we're tasting now, the White Cliffs, which is your estate sparkling wines.
Well, actually, it's the Chalklands we're tasting right now. The classic cuvee, and then we'll move on to the
sorry.
White Cliffs. That's all right. So this is our main sparkling wine, the Chalklands Classic Cuvee. This is our 3rd release of this wine from 2018. Generally with English sparkling wine, not always, classic cuvee means it's a blend of the 3 classic varieties, so Chardonnay, Pinot Noir and Pinot Meunier. So our first wine, one of the first wines we released was our 2016 Chalklands Classic Cuvée, and this was our first harvest, remembering. And we were lucky enough or successful in winning a gold medal and trophy at the Champagne and Sparkling Wine World Championships as best newcomer. So that first release was very much very fresh, citrusy, minerally style. 2017 we had a small crop because we got badly hit by the beast from the east, an atmospheric frost, which is a problem in these parts of the world. And so we had a small crop but very rich flavours. So the 17 was quite developed and rich in flavour. Quite a few sommeliers suggested it tasted a bit like vintage champagne. And then the 18 we've gone to the style that we think we're going to carry on with. Because I think within a sparkling wine estate, you start out, you've planted your vineyards, you're trying to work out what style works with where you are and how you make the wine and what you're comfortable with. So the 18 we think is pretty well where we want to be, with lovely fresh citrus and green apple fruit, some baked characters, some developed characters that make it very appealing, but of also interest to those drinking it.
And what's the blend in this? So
it's 40% Pinot Noir, and then 30% Chardonnay and 30% Pinot Meunier. But it's the first time we've had Pinot Meunier in the blend, because the first 2 years we didn't have enough to warrant putting in the blend. First crop was very small, and the second crop got very badly hit by the frost.
I mean, it's interesting you have more Pinot Noir in your blend, because Pinot Noir ripens a bit later than Chardonnay. I mean, it's a statement that then the sites that are ripen, they're good enough to ripe also Pinot Noir, and also you're making some excellent still wines, which we're going to talk later on. And also the other two sparkling wines. Do you have one made from classic champagne clones? And
so we have 4 styles of sparkling wine. So the Chalklands we've just tasted. We also produce the Canterbury Rose Sparkling Rosé, which is lovely pale pink, and it's all about lovely berry fruit, nice and fresh, and that's gone down very well. Then we have our Flintfields Blanc de Noir, which is purely Burgundy clone, 115, used to make sparkling wine. So that has some very lovely spice and red fruit characters and good depth, as well as being elegant at the same time. And the wine we're about to taste, which is our White Cliffs Blanc de Blanc, our first release of a Blanc de Blanc from 2017. It's purely sparkling wine clone Chardonnay, and it spent 3 years on lees. It's got some of that lovely linear character, lovely citrus and some tropical fruit of a Blanc de Blanc, but there's a nice creaminess to the finish that's really, really attractive.
so if you were to compare, obviously you work a lot with champagne varieties. If you were to compare the wines that produce here in Simpsons, or also in Kent in general, how would you compare them to the one from Champagne? Did you find any difference, any underlying difference?
I think a lot of people comment on it. I think there's no sort of common Englishness necessarily, except for maybe that sort of lovely freshness and a certain amount of that chalkiness, particularly we get in our wines. I think that's the sort of English, sort of Kentish character, perhaps. But I think some of we get quite generous flavours from our site. So I think we've introduced some generosity, which is probably unique to where we are, unique to our vineyards and our approach. But that's the great thing about the English wine industry. It's not, it's a new industry, relatively new really, even though this goes back a long time in history, but this manifestation of it. And there's a lot of different experimentation going on and learning, and the vines are now being planted in the right places and the right varieties, and they're coming of age, they're slowly coming of age. So there's an exciting future ahead, and the wines will just get better and better. Yeah,
no, I mean, as you said earlier, it shows that there is this interest to have the right sites, and also in the early history of English wine, there was this experimenting to find the right size, and now we start seeing the more and more precise vineyard planted, and it's a statement here in Simpsons. But also, I found it very interesting here in Simpsons that you're focused on still wines, and here we're trying soon your rosé. But before we get to that, I want to try the White Cliffs.
Yes, please do. So obviously named after the famous White Cliffs at Dover, a lot of our wine names that are relevant to where we are and what we're doing. As I said, this is from 2017. It's purely Chardonnay, our first release. We've shown a few people, it's been well received. Just, all our sparkling wines have this lovely fine bead. You can see small bubbles coming up. Yeah. Always a sign, I think, of quality, and also for me, the suggestion that it's going to be nice and caressing in the mouth. Yeah. And then on the, nice, clean, golden colour with a slight sort of green tinge. And then on the nose, you get this mixture of citrus and tropical fruit, but there's nice brioche characters coming out. The aged lees, the lees aging.
And is your yeast is champagne yeast, or do you work with your autochthonal yeast, or how does?
I think it's predominantly classic champagne yeast used in this wine. Some of the parcels of the Chardonnay might have been a little bit riper or treated differently to build up the complexity.
And this is on your white chalk you were talking earlier. How does that help with with viticulturally?
Well, first, in terms of chalk soils, they're very free draining, so vines don't like sitting in wet soil for long periods of time. So very beneficial from that point of view. Having said that, the vines, if it's really hot weather, they can draw on the water that's stored in the chalk, so they have a choice. It's not forced upon them. But, I think, the wine trade often, and wine writers talk about the mineral characters and chalkiness in wines. And, we all think it comes from the soil, and the scientists try and tell us it's not. But I think there's so much anecdotal evidence that that there is some effect somehow. It can't be proven at this stage, but it seems to come out in the wines. It's not necessarily imagined, but there's always a healthy debate about that.
Well, we were walking earlier along the vineyards, and your chalk is actually has flint inside, so definitely that.
Yeah, so literally we have that classic Kent flint, as you can see from the church that we walked through, the churchyard. It's made from that flint, and then the chalk is encased around it. So we've got a mixture of chalk and flint. Our Railway Hill vineyard, so that was on the Roman Road vineyard. Our Railway Hill vineyard is probably more chalk with a sort of slightly different soil, so it's slightly different. And again, we pick the different varieties and the different clones, keep them separately as possible, and that allows us to have lots of different parcels of wine that build up complexity when we put them back together as wines. So we might treat each one slightly differently.
And just before we move to the still wines, because I think that's very much the most interesting and fascinating part for me, because I love the fact that you're focusing on still wine in a climate, and then it's very marginal, and it doesn't really spring to mind as a first choice to make still wines, but you're doing excellent work with them, and your Chardonnay and Rosé with Rymill later. But on your sparkling wines, so how do you do your aging, and what is the style of aging for?
So it's as I said, we've got 4 styles. The Canterbury Rose, sparkling rosé, very much a fresh style, berry fruit. So that spends about 15 months on lees, just adds a bit of texture and softens it off. But we want to capture that lovely bright, ripe fruit. The Chalklands Classic Cuvée spends 20 or so months on lees, and just adds a lovely, again, texture and a bit of that brioche to the sparkling wine. Flintfields Blanc de Noir spends 27 months on lees, really adds a bit of a savoury element to the wine. And then the White Cliffs we're just trying has spent 3 years on lees. So very much in the traditional classic method that we make them, varying degrees of lees aging, and fairly typical of English sparkling wine. Some people age them for longer.
Yeah, because at this stage there isn't a strict law on how long is the minimum aging in the UK. I don't know if there is any talks in the top of the.
No, I think for what's called the classic method, or the British classic method, there is a minimal amount of lees. I think it's 12 months on lees. At this stage, but don't quote me. You might have to look that up.
I'll have to double check that.
Yeah.
And so let's move on to your still wines, because you said at the beginning they had some Charles and Ruth decided to plant some Burgundy clones, and then. How did that develop?
So initially, the whole project, as I said, was about sparkling wine, and to add depth and complexity to the sparkling wines they wanted to produce, they planted some Burgundy clones of each variety. And then from early on, in the first harvest in 2016, the winemaker Lee convinced them to try making a small batch of Chardonnay, dry still wine, as an experiment, and that went well. And then 2017 they made a bit more, and then in 2018 we had a fantastic summer in the south of England, lots of sunshine, lots of warmth, and it kept going and going, and we had the perfect combination of high quality grapes, good flavours, and lots of grapes. So there's a high crop, because the year before had been hit by frost, and the vines had carried the energy across into the next year. So it was decided to make a range of still wines from that year, because we had so many grapes and such good flavours, and the summer kept going. So it was decided to make two styles of Chardonnay. One, our Gravel Castle Chardonnay, is very much like a Chablis, very unoaked style. Yeah. Roman Road, which would have been our third release, which is much more like a white Burgundy, mixture of techniques, barrel maturation, barrel fermentation used in that one. It was also decided to make a white Pinot Meunier. So Pinot Meunier is a red variety. You can make a white wine if you get the juice away from the skins, because all the colour comes from the skins. So Ruth and Charles have been given a German version by her brother, who's involved in wine, and they really enjoyed it, so it was decided to make a white Pinot Meunier, so very unusual. And then also they decided, having tasted some of the grapes from the top of the Railway Hill vineyard, first crop Pinot Noir, that there was some really good ripeness and intensity and flavour. They decided to make a small batch of dry red wine, Pinot Noir, in a Burgundy style, from that section, and that was called our Rabbit Hole Pinot Noir, and that's proven very successful.
Yeah, and so what are the clones in the new? What was obviously there's like 100 different clones in Burgundy alone. Yeah. So what was what are they? Then you are the one you have here for the Chardonnay.
Well, you'll have to. Ruth is probably more au fait with the exact clones. I remember some of them. There's quite a few. Certainly for Pinot Noir, I believe it's 115, and we have some 777. Yeah. And there's another clone that's coming on stream in our new plantings. I think initially it's the 115 in the Burgundy, the Pinot Noir that's really worked.
I mean, I did try the Chardonnay I'm tasting now the Rosé, and I do find it is like roundness and a good fruit into it, and it's very balanced, which makes very compelling wines, still wines, which for me is very interesting, especially coming from England. As I said earlier, it's fantastic. So tell me a bit more about this Railway Hill Rosé. Well, what is then we're trying?
So the Railway Hill Rosé is purely made from Pinot Noir, and the aim is to make a lovely pink, pale pink style rosé with beautiful berry fruit, with strawberry and berry fruit, but also to have some quite good aromatics and also some lovely texture. So you balance the fruit, and again, a lovely refreshing acidity. It's not aggressive acidity, but there's a nice texture that fills the whole mouth. And I think what happened is that Charles and Ruth, as I said before, had struggled to enjoy English still wines before, and they came with an outside looking in sort of viewpoint, and same with Lee, the winemaker, and they've worked on techniques. So they have the benefit of good sites, they picked the right sites. They've planted Burgundy clones, which again means you can get ripeness and generosity in the fruit. And then the third element is how you handle it in the winery. Mm-hmm. So it's about keeping that fruit freshness, looking after that, but at the same time using techniques like leaving it on lees in the tank, yeast lees, which adds softness and texture to the wines and bringing some balance into it. And I think that's why our still wines are really hitting positive notes from people really enjoying them. They're finding a typical Englishness about them, but also some generosity.
Yeah, there is also the experience in southern France. Definitely must have taught them what they like in their still wine, because southern France is very much specialized on the red and the white still. So definitely they know what they were looking for in a still wine. And England is a marginal climate. You always have some risks and rewards. Obviously, they come with that. Obviously, the biggest risk probably in England is being frost. And you were telling me earlier about frost, the tearing techniques you have to use in the vineyards and everything. And that adds to the overall cost of production, and with low yielding than you have in England, because, again, it's a marginal climate that always have to be taken in consideration with English wine, and especially with I try to make sure that my listeners understand this, which England is a new wine country, and there's a lot of risks, but there's a lot of rewards. I really like the wines here at Simpsons. I really enjoy them. And I mean, I wanted to thank you for this half an hour together. And I mean, I cover all of the question I had. If you have anything else to add on, but I think we've been...
Well, yeah, as you say, about rewards and risks, and you know, it is great to be part of the English industry where it's going, and it's in a really good, interesting new phase. I mean, I talk about it being a new wave industry. It's not part of the wine industry. It's not old world. It's not new world. It's new wave, and I think the risks outweigh, the benefits outweigh the risks. But it's the Simpsons, like a lot of the estates here in England, have put a lot of effort and investment in, and they're very serious about what they're doing, and there's a great future ahead.
You listen to the Looking Into Wine podcast with Simpson Vineyard in Kent. Remember to hit the subscribe button and to tell your friends about the podcast if you're enjoying these series. You can find Looking Into Wine on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, and every major listening app. If you're enjoying the podcast, you can donate on mattiascarpazza.com. Music produced by Samuele Di Nardo, editing and mastering by Tommaso Ascoli.